Okay, so it is 5:01, and I'd like to call to order the, where are we at? October 13th meeting of the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee. Court, would you like to call the Concord School Committee to order, and then we can take a roll call?
Thank you. I'll call the Concord Public Schools School Committee meeting to order, and we'll use our new tradition for roll call. Alexa?
Anderson present.
Booth present.
Bout present.
Ms. Dead present.
Rainey present.
Wilson present. I'd like to note that the meeting is being recorded, and I want to reiterate the thanks that have already been extended to Dorothy for guiding us through an education on roles, responsibilities, Court, is there anything you'd like to say?
Well, just maybe I would add this. When we look at our agenda, we know that the focus is on the roles, responsibilities, and relationships work that Dorothy can facilitate for us to get our year off to as well a prepared start as we can. We think this is a really good way to lay the foundation for the new committee to be as effective as we have to be in a rather unusual year with, I'm sure, more challenges coming at us. When we looked at how to organize the evening, we thought it best to consider the manual that Cynthia has labored so much on our behalf as something we could tackle perhaps with the following question, and that is when we get to that section, we might ask, how did the manual set us up for the work we're about to do with Dorothy? So we're going to launch into that work and then examine the manual as a piece that informed us to make the session with Dorothy that much more valuable. That'll be one way we'll sort of discuss and debate the efficacy of that manual and whether we can find any ways to improve it still further. And keep an open mind about that. So that was just by way of potential process. I see Cynthia nodding that might be all right. So we turn to you for whether that's a good process. So we might give that a try, and we'll be mindful of our time tonight as well.
We can probably briefly start with brief introductions. I don't know if any of you have already, well, if you've seen any of the MASC videos, you most likely are familiar with Dorothy by now. Or if you've done any policy work, you're definitely familiar with Dorothy. Dorothy is definitely an invaluable resource to the school committee, to the school operations overall. And thank you for coming. We can go maybe do the alphabetical order is the easiest way to go about introductions.
That'd be great.
Yep.
Hi, Dorothy. I'm Alexa Anderson. I'm on the Concord School Committee.
So Alexa, were you just elected to the committee?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what prompted you to run for the committee, particularly in the midst of all that's happening right now?
It was a little pre-pandemic, but two things. I had been fortunate enough to participate a few years ago in our superintendent's long-range planning committee, which was like a group of, 50 some odd people of varying constituencies in town. And when that kind of wrapped up, I kind of missed it and thought that this would be sort of a natural extension of that work that I liked a lot. And then I had done some work also with Heather. We're trying, as you probably know, or maybe don't know, to get a new middle school in our town. So I had worked in partnership with Heather a little bit about a year ago, I guess now. And again, this is a better way to actually get stuff done. So those were the two sort of main impetuses.
All right. Thanks.
Sure.
And if we're going alphabetical, I'm Court. and this is my third year, Dorothy. I was involved in the Concord and Concord Carlisle schools for many years. Before that, was a school administrator at Medford High School for 10 years. Also have kept a role in experiential education work with groups like Project Adventure and Outward Bound for many, many years. When I left the public schools in 2016, I thought I had plenty to do and said goodbye to the schools, and was asked by a exiting member, might I serve? And I thought, well, I always like doing something new, and I'm pretty keen on Concord and Carlisle and the schools. So that was with a little coaxing, that was enough to convince me.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Dorothy. I won't spend too much on my background. I've worked with you before, but as you know, this is I guess I'm in my 6th year now. Have played various roles on the committee, chairing for a few years and other things. And so I would just say I'm really thankful for you being here. And I'll just mention for others that Dorothy knows our committee and our history and background and processes pretty well, which I think is really helpful for this discussion, because it's not like she's someone coming in here, cold with just a conceptual idea of how to run a committee. I'm just very much looking forward to the conversation, because I know Dorothy knows some of how we operate. And I think it's really, really important, given all of the experiences that I've had every year on the school committee, each one of which has been different, seeing the ways that a committee working well or not working well together can really affect how effective we are as a committee. So I really want to use this as an opportunity tonight to get us all synced up and really rowing in the same direction, because it makes a huge difference.
Okay, thanks.
I am next, I guess. Yes, nice to meet you. And yes, I am newly elected, like Alexa. And like Court, I was invited to run for school committee, and I obliged. So here I am. I have lived in Concord 5 years, and I have 2 sons in the middle school. And in the 5 years that we've lived here, we have experienced the 3 different levels of the district. And I have been active at all 3 levels during the 5 years, and it was only natural for me to continue that work in a more formal way on the school committee. I want to be on the school committee in order to give back to this wonderful community that has welcomed us and supported us. And serving on the school committee is one of my ways to give back. And I want to take part in the journey of the school district to higher grounds. And it's going to be and they're saying a challenging year, but it's only again, it's a natural thing to step up when the need arises. And I'm happy to be here and looking forward to working with every individual on the school committee and the school district, and learning from you and everyone else.
Thank you.
Hi, Dorothy. It's Cynthia Rainey. This is my 2nd year on the committee. And I think what I'm hoping for tonight is that in sort of a chaotic year, not created locally, that we can become, as Heather was saying, sort of grounded and understanding some really important basics, so that we don't get distracted and understand our role in not just during COVID, but in general, what our role is versus perhaps the superintendent and other bodies. So that's it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Sarah Wilson. I am, let's see, I'm coming from Carlisle. So this is my 2nd year on Carlisle School Committee, my 1st year on the regional school committee. I, like Alexa and a few others here, also served on the strategic planning committee a few years ago. That was sort of my first introduction. to the region, as I have two younger kids who are now one is in the high school. I think like everyone else, I've served in a lot of ways around the school, at least in Carlisle, and it was sort of a natural progression to, and was asked to, go forward and be on school committee. And I have two children with very different academic trajectories, and they've both been very well served by our schools, and want to give back to that and want to be a part of it, really. I am particularly looking forward to tonight as in Carlisle, we don't do the MASC policy work. We don't have a lot of guidance and helping hands, and I think that especially being new to the region, and this is a different setup. It's all a little bit different. I think this is going to be very beneficial to learn best practices, effective meeting ways, and sort of clarify roles and responsibilities, and definitely relationships. So that's all I've got. And I just got a message from Eva, who unfortunately is in the doctor's office right now, and she's going to try to call in later, but she is not going to make it until she's done.
Okay. Lori, did you have anything you wanted to add to the introductions?
Not really. I think this is just a great opportunity for, it's been such an unusual onboarding for these new members, and they came in at different stages for a whole set of reasons that were beyond any of our control. So I feel like we're just getting started as a new group, and we just want to really form a high functioning team. I think I'll echo a little bit of Heather and Court's history of, we've seen really high functioning dynamics, and we've seen some strained ones, and I think we're all really invested in making this a really high functioning group. I know the potential is enormous, so I'm hoping this is a good start to that.
Okay, thanks. So for those of you who are just meeting me for the first time, I just want to add that I am a field director at MASC, do a lot of training around governance work. It's sort of the area at MASC that's the one that I sort of lead the field directors on. And all MASC field directors have a history of being on a school committee. So I was actually on my school committee for 21 years and spent 12 of those years as chair. So I'm coming to this not only with knowing your committee somewhat, but knowing what it's like to sit on the committee and face some of the challenges and the other wonderful things that can happen on a school committee. So I thought tonight the way that I wanted to approach this, because I feel like I don't need to dig into the nitty gritty of, what positions do you have what authority on, and so forth, to hit things from a more high level discussion point of view about what the school committee is all about, how the school committee and the superintendent can work together as a governance team, and use some of the information that we provide and some of the best practices and research as a conduit to questions, communications, talking about best practices and how it works with your committee, your committees, and how we can maybe talk about ways that maybe it's not working so smoothly, and how do you get, how might you think about changing your practice a little bit to get things to work the way you want it to work? That sound good?
Mhm.
Okay, so let me share my screen here. There we go. So you should be seeing my screen. And I need to fix something here so that I'm seeing the right thing on. I have two monitors going, so I want to make sure I'm seeing all the things I want to be seeing too. I want to try to make sure I can see all of you. Okay. Okay, looks like I can also see all of you, so that if you are wanting to talk, going further ahead than I want there. So if you are wanting to say something, please, as I do workshops, I always want me to not be necessarily doing all the talking, but have things be a discussion. So please feel free to jump in if you have any questions or thoughts that you want to share. Got it?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about the work of the school committee, and you think about in the big picture, what are we there to do? Why are we here? What would be your answer to that question?
I think I like the way that Court Booth put it a while ago. I think we are here to allocate resources to support our district in providing them with the resources that they need in order to function to the best of their ability.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I'd say similar, but I'd probably word it in terms of supporting the district in enabling the district mission.
Mm-hmm. So according to the National School Boards Association, the overarching mission of any school committee is continuous improvement in student achievement. And when we're talking about student achievement, we're talking about how you define it for the students in Concord and the students in Concord Carlisle, or the students in Carlisle. So it's not just what are their test scores, it's what do you want them to know, to be able to do, to have achieved by the time they either move up to the regional or by the time they cross the stage at graduation. And that allocation of resources, that support of the goals and the mission fall right under that umbrella. We often talk about the fact that the budget is the biggest resource that you have to enable you to accomplish your goals. So knowing what your goals are and knowing that you're allocating those resources appropriately to achieve it is certainly a big piece of the work. And having goals, knowing the direction of the district and monitoring the progress towards getting it there is certainly an important role of the school committee. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about,
If I might, Dorothy?
yeah, sure.
I just share with you, one of my challenges has been to continue to focus on student achievement. Because it sounds so obvious, so intuitive, so necessary. But even though we're not operational people, we spend some time on operational things as a committee.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the challenges, how can you spend less time on operational things and more time on the governance aspect? There's certainly some aspect of monitoring where you're going to hear about the operational things, but how do you not get into the weeds? And I think at this particular point in time, I think that's even harder than it typically would be, because you've been asked to approve plans, and those plans can have a lot of operational things in it that you're asking about and wanting to make sure that it works. And you're also probably hearing more from parents in the community than you are in typical times, and trying to get answers to questions and make sure things are happening smoothly from that end. So I really applaud the idea that you're trying to spend some time tonight saying, how do we make sure we're in that governance role? How do we make sure that even in the midst of this unusual time, we're continuing to keep our eye on the prize, keep our eye on the big picture of where we want to be operating as a school committee in support of our students. I'll probably say this more than once, but we consider the school committee and the superintendent together to be the governance team that needs to be able to work effectively together, each from a different role. And we'll talk about that more as we go along.
Good. Thank you.
So in your, actually looking through your manual, and in your policy manual, one of the things that's in there is the code of ethics for school committees. Now, as school committee members, you have you have some responsibilities to the community, including students, to your fellow committee members, and to the administration. So there's sort of those three buckets of your school committee service that you need to be thinking about. And this is, part of the big picture. We'll talk about that big picture from a couple viewpoints. So when you're thinking about your responsibility to the community, in the big picture, the community, as I said, includes the students. So you are there really to focus on what's best for students. That's your primary responsibility, is thinking about and operating in a way that is the best for your students. In that role, your budget is, or your responsibility is really on policy. In that role, you need to remember always that you are one of a team that needs to be able to work together effectively. You're never able to operate as an individual. All the decisions are made by the school committee as a whole, operating as a team. So part of the challenge, I think, of coming onto a committee, particularly if you had to campaign to be there, is you were an individual and you were able to, your voice was always as an individual before you got on the committee. But now you're part of a committee that can only operate together as one group, and figuring out how to fit into that dynamic in a way that lets you accomplish the goals that you want to accomplish, and the district or the committee to accomplish the goals it wants to accomplish in the district. How does that all fit together to enable you to be a contributing member to all those things? Does that make sense? So you have your responsibility to the community and then to the administration. In the big picture, your responsibility to the administration is to allow and to expect the administration to be doing their job, which is the operational part. So you're making sure that there's clearly defined policy for the administration to operate within, recognizing where the chain of command or the chain of communication, recognizing you're part of it so that you're sending people to the right place when they approach you with issues, and making sure that you are holding all the administrators responsible for discharging their duties. Make sense? Any questions? Any thoughts?
I don't know that I have a question as much as Dorothy. I have a thought, which is I feel like looking back, this is one of the areas, especially as you point out here in the slide, how to act upon complaints from people that you get. I feel like this is one, I guess I'm just kind of flagging it as important and maybe something we'll end up coming back to, because I feel like this is one where we say it now and we read it and it makes perfect sense. And we all think, yeah, that makes sense. And then questions come and, community members reach out to you, and it's when you're in the weeds on these types of things that it's really hard to know what to do sometimes and how to follow up. And, and generally the answer is go ask the superintendent or get background and she'll help you figure out next steps. But I just wanted to kind of flag it as one that I know that over the years, even knowing that in concept, it was hard sometimes to figure out the best way to respond to people. And I don't know, I guess I found over time that the best thing was always to go straight to the superintendent and say, help, can you give me background on this? And, what's your suggestion on a response? And,
and I think you're right, because we talk a lot to school committees and school committee members about what's your role and what's your responsibility. And there are, we talk about the role not being constituent service the way you might think about your state senator or somebody being a constituent service person. Even if you go to them with a problem, they're not solving it. They may be giving it to a staff member to solve, which would be a little bit analogous for you going to the superintendent to get the right person to solve the problem. But what I'm getting to is, while we spend a lot of time talking to school committee members about roles and responsibilities, the people that don't know the role and the responsibility of the school committee is very often the members of the public, the ones calling you up, wanting action from you that you can't provide because it's outside of your purview. So it is tricky. And I often say that in my service as a school committee member, I had to learn more than once that when someone called me with a problem and, would explain their whole issue and it sounded so reasonable, and then I would hang up the phone and I would call the superintendent who would tell me the other side of the story, which sounded so reasonable. And, therein lies the fact that it's an issue, right? So knowing that there's almost always another side to a story, and that you're probably not getting the full side of the story on the first take, is important to remember, to listen, to be able to listen, to be able to be sympathetic, empathetic, but not make any commitments, is really helpful in that service. And I think I did have a chance to look through the manual, and I think it was stated very well in the manual about, I can't remember the exact words, but look for guidance. When you're dealing with an issue and wondering how to respond, look for guidance. That could come from the chair, it could come from the superintendent, but I think that's an important thing to remember.
How does this sound to you, Dorothy? When I sometimes question, to whom should a person be directed? It's always the superintendent, even if I think that may not be necessary. My guidance is, if it reached me, my channel is the superintendent. I can't pick and choose which of her designees should pick it up. So that's generally been my approach, even though I think Lori will quickly redirect it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is one of those times when we say, if you know how one committee handles things, you know how one committee handles things. If that is the way that this committee, this governance team has decided that things should be handled, then that's absolutely right.
Well,
and then, allow Lori to redirect it to the right place.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's been what I've tried to do, but I'm putting it out into the group to see if that's something that we need to talk further about and hear from Lori about.
Yeah, I've tended to default to the same thing, but I think we should hear from Lori on this one.
But I think you've answered part of it by saying we don't get the complete picture when we talk to one constituent.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just would want to know what you've been called about. That's usually why I ask. In the past, we've set it up so you could come right to me, and then 9 times out of 10, I go back out to the building-based people or send them right to the parent or whatever the situation is. I just wouldn't want to not know what the issue was that would go right from you to a principal. That would set us up for maybe some crossed wires at some point. So
I would second what Court thinks. I think as a committee, it's a good idea to have a set protocol and process. And that if there's something that you can't answer yourself, I mean, not every question that comes to us has to be immediately forwarded to Lori, right? Sometimes it might be something we've all discussed and you know the answer. And so you answer. And if it's something you think Lori needs a heads up on, you let her know that this question came in and you answered it or something, right? So there are different levels here. But if it's something where you feel like it has to go to someone else, which is often the case, I would second Court's suggestion that we default to the fact that we forward it to Lori, even if we know it's eventually going to be a question for Kristen or Jared or something else, because to Lori's point, it keeps her in the loop, and then we're all on the same page.
right.
So because we're in workshop mode here, Dorothy, with your 21 years, if a citizen says to you, I'm having trouble or whatever, and I want this held in confidence, do you represent yourself differently and step away from your school committee role? What do you do?
It's hard to help people address their issue if they don't want you to talk to anyone else about it. So I can't off the top of my head think of times when people said, I want this held in confidence. Like maybe it probably happened, but
Yeah.
I actually have
my
had
guess is
that.
my guess is I would say, well, in that case, I can serve as sounding board only.
yep.
Yeah, I've had that happen, and that's what I did. I said, you know, if I can't send you to the right person, all I can do is give you my personal advice, you know, as a friend or a neutral party as to what I would do in your shoes, and just kind of leave it at there. So like you said, Court, kind of sounding board, but very clear that this is not school committee advice. You're not getting a school committee answer. You know, you have to be very clear on those things.
It's
Right.
not based to school committee. It's
Right.
I have a question comment, and it has to do with, again, a school committee member acting on their own, and also the Freedom of Information Act. So if a citizen comes to a school committee member and shares something personal and says it needs to be confidential, but can this communication be retrieved under the Freedom of Information Act? So maybe Dorothy perhaps can guide us through this. Can we guarantee that we're going to keep that in confidence if we were requested officially to share that information?
So if someone conveys, or if someone emails you, or if it's a phone conversation, there's really nothing. I mean, that would stay confidential, right? Because there's no record of it. If they're emailing you on, then information can be requested in the Freedom of Information Act, but it doesn't automatically have to be turned over if it's determined that that is confidential information. There could be information that's redacted out of that if information is requested by somebody. Generally, when people are looking for Freedom of Information requests, it's more general than a conversation than a school committee member may have had with a member of the public. It may be it's usually about one issue where they're asking about the correspondence on that particular issue. And you would certainly work with your counsel if that happened to be the case to determine what would be able to be released and what would not. Lori, do you want to jump in on anything there?
Yeah, it is important, Fatima's right, that your emails are public record. I have yet in my years have had any requests for school committee emails, because often it's more specific. Either they're broad-based, general, very district-wide data requests we're getting, or they're very specific to an issue. That said, you always want to be really thoughtful that whatever's in your email is public record. You can't control what comes into you, though, right? So there may be times and places, depending on the topic, where names are redacted or things like that. So it's very situational, but I think Fatima's right to put it on your radar that you should always be aware that records can be requested, they can be subpoenaed, any and all of that can happen. So it's smart to be very careful what you're corresponding. If it truly is something that shouldn't be communicated in the request because of the confidentiality of what's in there, generally counsel will tell us we can redact it so nobody else's privacy is violated. But it all depends on what the topic is. So
yeah. And there are district websites that have sort of a disclaimer at the bottom of their emails that say, please understand this is a public record. Yeah. So that even if people are emailing you, sometimes that disclaimer pops up when they're, if they're clicking on something on your website to send you an email. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Fatima?
Yes, thank you.
So Dorothy, I think I was under the impression that there was always this, you refer things to the superintendent to not mix up channels. And while it may create more work for Lori in the short term, it may stave off a lot more work in the long term, I think, is the cost analysis there, right? I guess that's not how everybody operates. And so I think as everyone else has said, like we should decide as a committee, right? Is that how we want to operate, and at least have everybody acknowledged. So I just wanted to hear from Cynthia, Alexa, if anyone had other thoughts on this.
No, my experience is that I don't think there's any other way to go. Perhaps if I were not chair, I would go to the chair first if I wanted guidance. But I would absolutely go directly to the superintendent.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement as well.
Go ahead, Alexa.
No, I was just going to say I'm in full agreement with that. I feel like that I'm a big fan of policy in general, and I think it helps streamline processes. And again, you know, Lori has said she wants this information, and she's going to know better, I think, than any of us, even where it should be delegated out to. So I don't see any reason not to have be formal policy.
Yeah, the advantage of having that sort of, you know, we talk about sort of the chain of command, that of sort of having that go backwards for the school committee, is that then Lori knows the issues that are out there. And what, you know, one or two people might get called on the same issue. And when Lori knows that a couple people are getting calls on the same issue, then she knows it's an issue, right? It's something that she may be needing to look at, rather than send, you know, if you're sending them off to a building principal, Lori may not know then that's an issue she should be talking to that principal about and addressing. So there is, while it may, I think, Sarah, you hit it right on the head. It may be a little bit more work in the short run, but it may be more beneficial in the long run.
As a practical matter, I think there's one other thing we might want to talk about tonight. You said the words chain of command, just as I was thinking the following. Were you to be out for a week, Lori, we have an education leader who reports to you, and we have an operational leader who reports to you. So is your thinking that the two of those folks would share the same seat in your absence, and it becomes a twosome that we are interacting with?
Yeah, that would be my recommendation, just because they both are so well connected. Jared on the operations side and Kristen on the teaching and learning side. So that's always been my vision, and that's what I've communicated to them.
Good. In these uncertain times when we are all living dangerously, it's good to know. Now that we know it, we're not going to need it. Good. Yep. Okay.
Remember to carry your umbrella so it doesn't rain.
Right.
I made sure they had the COVID protocols way long ago. So if they need them and I can't get to them, it's all bulleted. So we're trying to stay ahead of it to prevent any necessary action there.
Okay.
Well, I flagged this one, and it looks like I derailed us for a while, but that was
no. But that was really my intent, that things get flagged to be able to be discussed as we sort of get to them, rather than trying to put everything in the parking lot for the end. Right. So happy that you did that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I think my one last comment on that is, not all the time, but a good portion of the time, the people that go to you have already been to me and not cared for the answer they got. So it really is important that you've engaged me in the conversation.
Yeah,
you know, I try to tell you and give you a little flag on when I can see that coming, but not always. So
you know, in that not getting the whole story very often, that little piece is missing, that they got an answer that they just weren't happy with, so they're sort of shopping for the answer that they'd like to hear.
Well, and to give them the benefit of the doubt, they're not entirely clear on our role and our boundaries.
True,
right.
True.
And there have been times, I would say positively, them calling you has brought me back to the table to rework with them, and not necessarily change the answer, but rebuild the connection again. So
yeah, good point.
No harm done.
Okay. So the third part of that ethical, community administration is your fellow committee members. So, as we said, you're part of a team. So those team decisions get made at the committee table. And you want to make sure that you're not making commitments outside of that table, that you're listening when decisions are being made, that you're listening to your fellow committee members openly, and making decisions once you have all the facts. And then obviously making sure that you are upholding the intent of executive session by keeping executive material confidential. Any questions there? Okay, I will send this slide deck. So just let me stick that in, that you'll see all, you don't have to worry about taking notes so I went through a whole presentation the other night and someone said, well, if you told me at the beginning, I wouldn't have taken a screenshot of every slide. So, so just let you know that's happening. So we talk a lot about what the research says about the what makes an effective school committee that has that high impact on student achievement. There's actually been research that's been done on that. And there are attributes and practices that have been identified that have that high impact on student achievement. So some of the practices are that effective school committees have various meeting formats to maintain that focus on student achievement. So at their meetings, their time is spent talking about achievement, talking about their goals, talking about what they can do to impact that student achievement. And if there are issues that come up that, there's obviously the warrant signing and different things that you need to do that are sort of more business oriented. But if there's a topic that comes up that you say, we need a good in-depth conversation about just this topic, then having a workshop format meeting or something where you can focus just on those topics, goal setting or whatever, can be very helpful in having the committee keep that focus. Committees that have that high impact, make sure that there are goals in place. We talk about the fact that school committees have an obligation to make sure there are district goals in place. It doesn't mean the school committee is dreaming up the goals. You're doing it in collaboration with the superintendent, with the administrative team, but making sure those goals are there and that they're being implemented. So that monitoring piece of not just setting the goals and assuming they're going to happen, but that, getting reports that show, are the goals being implemented? Is the work that's being done getting us where we want to get to? And if not, what needs to change to enable us to reach our goals is an important part of the work of the school committee. I often think of goal setting as sort of putting a frame around and giving a structure to the work of the committee, in having it be the focus of the work that you're doing. So you're making sure that there's that alignment of goals from the district goals down, through superintendent's goals, in the school improvement plans and so forth, to make sure that everyone in the district is, rowing their oars in the same direction to accomplish those goals. Making sure that when you're making those budget decisions, as we talked about earlier, that's the resource you have to implement those goals. So making sure that your budget decisions support your goals. Sometimes when budget times are tough, it's almost easier to make the budget decisions when you're making sure you keep those goals front and center in those decisions, as that resource that you have to move things forward. Then effective school committees engage in self-governance. So a little bit what you're doing here tonight is looking at how do we work together? How can we have practices that help us accomplish what we want? Are we doing what we said we would do, and can we do a better job of what we're doing? And then sort of, again, analogous to tonight, engaging in professional development. So learning what you need to know about education to be able to make effective decisions, learning what's going on in the world of public policy that can help make those effective decisions as well. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions there?
Just a comment, and that is that where, and I'll just share this with my colleagues here, where want help and support this year is on working on goals and monitoring through more clarity around the measures we're using.
Mm-hmm.
So that I don't get lazy and fall into the trap of doing more of something means success.
Yep. Yep. So you could get me off on a whole track about goal setting and monitoring if you wanted to do that. I'd be happy to. But one of the things that's really important when you're setting your goals is understanding the outcome that you're looking for. So a goal isn't, you may have goals that are more aspirational or less aspirational. And, when you're looking out to your 3 to 5 year plan, I think you have a 5-year plan. It would look
Correct.
like 18 to 23 or something.
Yeah, that's right.
So, the big picture, big bucket overarching goals you have in that plan are going to be a little bit more aspirational. But as you're looking to what specifically is the work we're doing in whatever the defined time frame is, probably a school year, what specifically are we looking for this year that will get us closer and closer to that goal in 2023? And what is the outcome that we're looking for? Not just what are the tasks that are going to be done, but what's the outcome we're looking for from the work? And how do we measure whether that outcome has happened? It's easy to measure whether you did a bunch of tasks. It's a lot harder to measure whether you got that outcome. So being able to define exactly what you're looking for. Sometimes I think about it in a year from now. How will the district be different? How will things look different in what we're doing or what we're seeing if this goal is implemented as we intended? Lori, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's exactly right. And trying to not have it just be this action list, but what did we actually accomplish? Did we accomplish what we set out to accomplish? So maybe that's more discussion on this side of the goal of making sure we all have the same vision of what that is, and then we can determine how to best assess it.
Yeah. But I think that, particularly when I talk to school committees about goals and superintendent evaluation, making sure that to the extent that you can, everyone has had enough of a discussion about outcomes so that when you get to the end, there's agreement on whether you reach the outcome or not, is a really important part of that goal setting process. Make sense, Court?
Yeah, it does. It does. If we can even have conversations around what will it look like in 1 year and who will be impacted and how. Because change ultimately is manifest in achievement, as you say, and that means people, and that means development. And so our ability to try to quantify it that way, even though we don't want to be driven entirely by tests and measures, still is a useful part that can get lost for school committees, I think. Yeah.
Well, and you're right, and there are ways to look at how things are accomplished without being just the test scores, right? There are other measures you can look at. And some of the measures may be more qualitative than quantitative, but at least being clear what you're looking at is helpful.
And we've struggled, in the best sense of the word, we've struggled for decades on qualitative measures. Because we know that's one of the ways this district distinguishes itself.
Right, exactly. Okay, any other comments on this? So those were some of the practices. Some of the attributes are that high-performing committees have a vision of high expectations. So when there are challenges, they look at that as issues to overcome, not excuses for why things aren't happening. They focus on accountability for themselves, as well as for really everyone else in the school, amongst the school administration, the school staff, even the students. So is everyone doing the job that they're supposed to do in order to help us reach what we want to be reaching? They use data to monitor progress. So a little bit of what Court was talking about. There's a lot of data that can cross the table at school committee meetings, but committees that are effective take a step back, looking at the goals and what they want to accomplish, and think about what's the important data for us to be digging into and know and understand, rather than just looking at a lot of things at a very high level or superficial level. What do we really need to concentrate on? And that's a lot of that is thinking about what is the evidence we need to be looking at to understand whether or not we're reaching our goals. And they work on fostering strong relationships amongst themselves as that governance team, and leading as a united team with collaboration, trust, and respect amongst the team members. That makes sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. So get a little bit more into the roles and responsibilities of the superintendent and the school committee. Both parties have a leadership role. The school committee is leading from a governance standpoint, the superintendent from a management standpoint. One of the things, I was doing some reading today to update some of my things. One of the statements that I read that kind of makes sense is school committee steers the boat, the administration is rowing the boat. So sort of a way to think of that differentiation of that governance versus that operational role. The superintendent is going to be coming to the school committee with recommendations about policy, about budget, about goals. The school committee deliberates over those recommendations, makes a decision, and hands it back to the superintendent to implement the decisions that the school committee has made. So the school committee is really asking some of the big picture questions of what do we want to be doing? Why? How does this fit into our core values or the vision that we have, and how much does it cost? And the superintendent's asking what you might think of as slightly more tactical questions of who does the work? Where does it get done? When does it happen? How does it happen? Particularly at goal setting time, the school committee is a bridge between the community and the superintendent. You're bringing the vision and values of the community to the table. The superintendent is bringing the needs of the staff to get the job done. So those two elements kind of come together at the committee table as you're having those discussions and making those decisions. That makes sense? Both parties have the responsibility for promoting trust and mutual respect in their relationship. And when it's all humming along fine and well, then you have the trust of the community as well. Make sense? Questions?
My observation is that, yes, this is true. And a superintendent like Lori, who's as engaged as she is in the larger community, doesn't rely on this school committee as much as might otherwise be the case for that bridging. Because she's got some credit with the community before she starts.
Yeah, I mean, this is making things look sort of very, very cut and dry when we all know it's not that cut and dry when you come right down to it. But because certainly superintendents very often have some of that communication flow and understanding, but it's really the committee that's there to sort of make sure that that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
And to validate it.
Yep. And yeah, good point. Good way to put it. Yep.
And Dorothy, maybe we can dig a little deeper into this, but when we talk about the community, there are obviously other governmental bodies in both towns. The select board, the finance committee come to mind. And I sort of see our role as also the bridge to those governmental bodies.
Yep. Particularly, so a regional district is a little bit of a different beast than a municipal district. So you have two municipal districts and a regional district that are all part of this entity here. And the regional district has different, it's really in the big picture of governance, it's almost a municipality on its own.
Pretty
right?
much.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that communication between the municipal entities is at least as crucial, I think, in that circumstance than, the school committee and the selectmen operating a municipal district.
Right, because technically, we know the school committee has legal responsibilities, but financially, in Concord, the school is really a department of the town. Is that sort of a correct statement?
Well, yeah. Yes and no.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, I think in a municipal, if you're thinking about financially, then I think that's more true than not, even though there would probably be a lot of school committees who would bristle at that way of looking at it, because of things like free cash. If you have any surplus, it's returned to the town's free cash. There's no E&D in a municipal district. And, so far as town meeting approving budgets, that's really the same in both places, but, with some different nuances.
Right.
So yeah.
I would also just say about this slide in general, and you said it briefly, Jonathan, but this is, on paper, it looks very clean and clear, and we all agree and say, yes, that's what each of our roles are. And then you get into real life and everything that's happening, and it can sometimes be really hard to figure out what roles are.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think this spring and summer was the perfect example, right? As we got to spring and it was time to put together a reopening plan potentially for the fall, and everybody, I think, kind of panicked for a little while. We all did, right? And what's our role here, and how involved do we need to be? And, if the superintendent's creating a process and focus groups and all of that, what's our role? Are we building this with her? Is she just telling us what she's doing? All of that. And so I think it's those kind of situations where it can be really hard sometimes to connect this slide to the reality of what's going on, especially when something like a pandemic hits that's unheard of and nobody knows how to operate it.
Right. Well, and partly because you're taking a lot of the things that would be spread out in time and you're mushing them. Mush with, the quick need to make decisions. I have observed, so when the commissioner first came out and said, superintendents need to have these plans, right? And then a lot of school committees were saying, hey, wait a second, there's budget implications in these plans. There's collective bargaining implications in these plans. There's policy implications. Those all are under our umbrella. And then the commissioner came out and said, okay, now school committees have to approve the plans. Then all the school committees who weren't originally saying that were kind of saying, why are we approving these plans? There's so much operational stuff in it that's not within our purview. Right. So trying to parse out all that, I think is in some ways remains to be hugely complicated for school committees. And boy, I would say, if you can manage your way through that, you're probably golden for whatever happens past pandemic.
Well, and it's interesting because I think we did find our way through it and we found a good balance, but this is going to continue, right? We're not done with the pandemic. We have a good plan now, and now we're monitoring, and we'll revise if necessary. But I think we're all still in the mode of it's not quite crisis mode now, but ready for crisis at any moment.
Yep.
And who knows, we might have to return to that plan. We might, as you monitor, you have to revise. So I guess I just want us all to be thinking of how that happens and works. And maybe it's that we keep this in mind. This visual slide is really helpful. We keep this in mind as we go forward, if and when we have to get back into kind of crisis time processes or whatever it is. And I don't know exactly what that means, but I'm kind of throwing it out there for us all to think about.
So some of the, as things come up, is it operational that you're being informed about? Or is it governance or policy, or a governance aspect that you need to make a decision about? Lori, you are welcome to jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, we've had to make our way through all of that. And I think we wisely had some of those conversations to sort it out, especially as we got to the late spring. March was such a quick turnaround. We all just sort of I just jumped in and tried to get something together, but the late spring, summer was much more able to be a process. And I think we did make our way through and continue to, Heather's right, it's going to have to be an ongoing conversation. My my goal right now is that you all stay so informed that if something starts to change, we all spot it coming and can start to look. And I think we need some feedback that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. We need some data points and a structured way to hear from the community on how things are going. We have a lot of anecdotal right now that's really positive, but we need to get much tighter about that. So crisis is crisis. I think there is not a roadmap to that. And I think we did a pretty good job of having the right conversations, which is why we landed where we did, in a plan that was really inclusive and you were all very engaged in. And I think part of the entire process right from the beginning, that at least was my goal. And I think we hit it pretty well.
Yeah. And I would say in general, the committees that were able to have those conversations are, as a governance team, in a better place than committees that weren't able to have those conversations.
Yeah.
So there's also a difference between being the committee, which only exists when there's a properly posted meeting with a quorum present, and being an individual member. We touched about a little bit on this when we were talking about communications with the, with the public, or, how do you handle requests and so forth. But want to make sure that we talk about it a little bit more. So outside of that committee meeting, you have no authority as an individual. You're just another voter, another man on the street. But you do have the responsibility to contribute to the work of the committee, particularly, at goal setting time, particularly you're contributing to those conversations when decisions are being made. You have the responsibility to come to the meeting prepared, to be ready to have those, ask those critical questions and participate in those deliberations. Not all decisions are going to be unanimous. So hopefully when they are not, and this kind of gets back to something that was in the ethics, once the committee makes a decision, it's important to be able to support that decision, which doesn't mean changing your mind if you happen to be on the no side of something, but it does mean not getting in the way of the decision being carried out. So one of the things we talk about is, as an individual, you never lose your First Amendment rights to speak as an individual, but you always want to clarify when you are speaking as an individual, and think about being able to say that you understand that you are a part of the committee and support the work of the committee, even if there are individual pieces of that work that you may have a disagreement with. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Then as the committee, you're obviously, you're using your meetings and your official capacity to make decisions. You're governing through policy. You have the fiduciary responsibility to make sure the financial resources of the district or the districts are used appropriately. And as we talked about before, engaging the community in the work of the schools, and you are the employer of record on any of the collective bargaining agreements that exist within the district. That makes sense?
Yeah. Yes, to me.
Yeah. So, there is that challenge. And again, I think some of it goes back to you understand your role, but maybe members of the public don't. And being able to articulate that there are certain things that the school committee has under its purview and certain things that they don't. And that only the committee can take action on different items. And trying to explain that to someone who's not happy can be a challenge, but that's where you can rely on fellow committee members sometimes for advice on how to respond to things, or the chair, or Lori. Make sense?
Yeah, and I think this sometimes has taken the form of us saying we decided such and such on a 5-2 vote, but we don't belabor it after that. After that,
Yep.
It's just the vote.
Yep.
It's just the decision after that.
Right. Exactly. And, you know, and a lot of times we talk about the fact that if there are deliberations and disagreement ahead of the vote, the community generally is understanding of that, and in some ways likes to see that decisions are made with that deliberation. When the disagreement happens after the vote, that's when the community starts to lose confidence in the committee. Make sense?
Yeah.
So we've talked about, in broad strokes, the role of the superintendent, the role of the individual committee member, and the role of the committee. I want to talk for a little bit about the role of the chair, because there are aspects of the chair service which make that person, Robert's rules, you know, would say first among equals. Also, according to Robert's rules, that what we adopt when we talk about the chair is servant of the assembly, not the master. But there is work that the chair needs to do to be able to help the committee be effective that I think sometimes new school committee members don't quite understand. So I'll talk about it, and you guys can talk a little bit about how it works there or questions that you have. So you've elected the chair basically to guide the work of the committee, to be your sort of organizational person that keeps that's sort of representing the committee in various ways, working with the superintendent to make sure that the committee is focused on its work, make sure that the committee has the right things on the agenda to talk about, make sure that the superintendent knows what's important to the committee to be hearing about, and conversely, hearing from the superintendent what she believes the committee needs to know and hear about and discuss. So there is communication between the chair and the committee, between the chair and the superintendent, that the entire committee is not going to be totally privy to. One of the roles of the chair in those discussions, or even sometimes in discussions with other, you know, we talked about the other municipal bodies that the committee works with. One of the roles of the chair, sometimes depending on those other bodies, is to protect the role of the committee, to make sure that the other municipal bodies aren't trying to step too much on the role of the committee. That didn't come out quite right. Step too much into the workings of the committee and try to guide the committee. The committee should be able to guide itself. But you want to have those good relationships, but you also don't want to cede to what other committees are telling you without being able to have those good discussions. And sometimes the chair is that intermediary to protect the role of the committee. The chair has the responsibility for helping guide that committee work. Remember, I talked about using the goals sometimes to give frame and structure to the work of the committee. So in thinking about what are we going to be talking about our meetings, how are we going to make sure our meetings keep us focused on that work, is one of the responsibilities of the chair, which may sometimes mean talking to a committee member and saying, you know, the issue that you have doesn't really fit into our work, or it doesn't fit in right now, or it's not the appropriate time. So let's talk about how we can get something addressed that may be outside the work of the committee right now. Kind of getting back to the superintendent and the chair talking together, there's going to be times when the chair has information that the rest of the committee doesn't have. Having spent 12 years in that position, it happens. But generally, it's the superintendent is sort of teeing up, something's coming up, and I need to, you know, the chair and the superintendent need to talk about it to decide how does that get to the full committee? When is the right time? What information is the committee going to need? How do we have a discussion that best guides a decision that needs to be made, or best informs the committee of what's going on? So I think a lot of times committee members think, the chair has all this information that we want. And it's usually not the case. It may be in advance and the committee will get it, but there's not usually a whole bundle of information that the chair is keeping from the rest of the committee. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
The chair also has that responsibility for, in keeping the work of the committee organized. Often the chair can share those leadership responsibilities in making sure that other people on the committee are getting a chance to develop new expertise or take advantage of expertise they have through subcommittee assignments, and being able to help committee members come up to speed and develop some of those areas of expertise that they might not have had when they step on the committee. I don't know many people who step on the committee with a really good understanding of school budgeting. But, sometimes serving on the budget subcommittee at some point helps build that understanding, or policy, or other aspects of the work that you're developing that leadership capacity and expertise. So in general, when the chair is able to sort of put all those pieces together, really the chair is helping the committee be sort of, you can think of it as greater than the sum of its parts, helping the committee, guiding the committee to the work that needs to be done, and using the members of the committee's expertise and knowledge and so forth effectively to get to those good decisions and get to that good work. Does that make sense to everybody?
Can I add a couple of comments, Dorothy?
Sure.
I want to echo your comments on the conversations between superintendent and chairs, and I bring it up again because it's something that we've had debate over in past years. And some committee members really want to see everything shared out immediately, and others would sway the other way. And so again, I'm kind of flagging this as something that has had discussion in the past, and I guess I would weigh in saying, even, not as chair now, I think there's a real value to the conversations that the superintendent and the chairs have in, like you said, determining what gets shared with the rest of the committee and when and how to do it most effectively and efficiently. Because a lot of times there is a lot of data and information, and it doesn't make sense to be just going to public meetings with a data dump without also here's a suggested follow-up to whatever the, situation may be. So I think that's really important for us all, those of us who are not chairs, to understand that there will be more flow of communication between the chairs and the superintendent. And that's really important to be an effective committee. I also think, one of our roles as a committee is to support our superintendent, who we've hired and want to be successful. And I think one of the things that we as a committee can do for her is give her the chairs as a sounding board, because everybody needs a sounding board on things sometimes. And I think that's an important role also. And again, some of that information discussed as a sounding board will come out to the committee, and maybe some not, because it's figuring out, what direction to bring the committee or what recommendations to bring. But I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, and also for other opinions. But I think that's an important role that our chairs can play.
Yeah, and I would agree. I would say, when an issue is coming up or when a discussion is coming up, that the chair being able to say, when you're putting together your presentation, don't forget that this aspect is going to be very important for the committee to hear about.
Right.
Can be helpful to make, Court talked about, making meetings effective. I think the chair can really play a role in making sure that meetings are effective, that when discussion items are on the agenda, you're fully prepared to have an efficient and effective discussion, that the information is there that the committee is going to want to be able to have a discussion or make a decision. And that, I guess that was it. I guess there's no and there.
Dorothy, what we pay attention to is one way we lead. And what we pay attention to gets captured in agendas, and agendas is a responsibility largely of the chairs. We have to stay on the right side of the open meeting law. What advice do you have for us in terms of how to be inclusive with all the members about agenda setting and agenda prep, observing the fine line between what we might talk about and talking about it? You follow me?
Yeah, I do. One of my favorite tools for keeping meetings efficient and making sure that everyone has a chance to have their voice heard or their important issues addressed is to have a year-long agenda where there's, during the summer or during some planning time, there's a discussion about here are our goals, here's what we want to hear about during the course of the year. And then the chair and the superintendent can work on when is the appropriate time to be able to have that presentation or to be able to talk about that topic. Court, I think you hit it right on the head. And I'm not exactly sure I'm going to phrase it the way you did, but what you talk about is what you focus on, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think you said it better than that, but
well, we can talk about an item, but we can't talk about the item.
no, but at your meetings, but
deliberate.
the agenda items that you have at your meetings is where you're going to be focusing your energy.
Right.
So how do you determine making sure you're focusing your energy where you really want to focus your energy and your time?
And I think we've done a very good job and continue to do a good job with that year-long agenda setting. What's more important, what's less important. And we do that as a very collaborative, open process. During the course of the year, I think chairs have to find a way to be attentive to opinions and priorities of members that might get reflected in agendas without doing offline deliberation.
That's part of the challenge of being a chair, I think. And sometimes that may be if something comes up to be able to look out a little bit on the year-long agenda and say, where does this fit? Where does this best fit in our discussion? Is there a topic coming up that this folds right into? Or it can be, the issue can become part of the presentation that's planned a few meetings down the road or whenever, so that you're not getting it sidetracked from what you've decided you want your focus to be for the year. And then, of course, there are going to be issues that come up that need more immediate attention and priority. If we had said, we have our agenda for the year, I'm sorry, we can't discuss the pandemic until we get, to the end of this year's agenda, you would have, that's an extreme example, but, issues are going to come up.
And I'm hearing an answer also in the following, that if we think we need to shift something, we bring that question to the entire committee.
Yep, absolutely.
And change up that year-long calendar that we had speculated on back in September.
Yep. I often think of the year-long agenda as being like, if not one of the most, if not the most flexible documents that you're working off of, because things do come up. Even to the extent of a planned presentation, somebody gets sick and can't make it, and you're going to have to shift your agenda around that. But to the extent that you can have that discussion about what is important to us this year and how is that reflected on the agenda, I think that does help you keep your meetings more effective and efficient.
So can I take Court's question? Oh, whoops, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Well, it sounds like when we're setting, basically when we're setting our goals, really there are sort of four boxes that we need to be able to fill in, which are like actions, impacts, evidence, and timing, right? And by having that, we'll be able to really structure our meetings and really all of our deliberations and planning a lot better. To what extent is that a feasible goal to even, or is it a necessary? I don't know.
I think it's feasible. And Lori, you feel free to jump in here too. Because I mean, we talk about the annual goals being more smart, like, and having key actions and benchmarks.
Mhm.
So, thinking about when is the appropriate time to report on progress on this goal can be a way that you're determining when it appears on an agenda in order to have enough information to have a fruitful discussion or an update about it. Lori, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do actually. I think the dynamics of the committee have made or broken the success of this plan. We've had those annual lists of the things people would like to discuss and hear about. Some years the committee's been able to really structure their meetings where there's just always time for those. And we've had really amazing conversations of academic related items and information of what's happened and I think some of you have been there for some of that. And then I think other years, other issues have dominated the agendas and we've really struggled to keep those on the plate to the point where I've had people queued up to make the presentations and had to cancel at the last minute. So I think it's back to that conversation we started with of what work do you want to do in the meetings and what's the work the committee wants to have. I think we've had amazing public conversations and some really high level, really strong student focused initiatives and progress. And I would love to see us get back to that. We kind of have slid. And so I think if that's our goal, I think we can get there and it'll be really, really valuable time spent in public on really important things. So let's make a list and then stick to it.
So, and I think that, that discussion amongst the committee is important because it's the committee that should be driving the conversation. And it's not necessarily 5 people's 5 different priorities that should always be. I mean, you've got to decide as a committee, what are your priorities and what is the work you want to do and agree on that as a committee and not just, it's every individual's priorities that we're going to talk about sort of pot shot. It needs to fit into a big picture. And if I'm listening to what Lori's or understanding what Lori's saying, when you had that good big picture and cohesion, you were able to have a lot more effective discussions and effective direction than when the committee was pulled off into individual priorities.
Yeah, and I think maybe the telling part is when they're not committee direction, we have a hard time figuring out how to settle the priority so we can move on to something else, and we sort of get stuck. And I think that's the work we can do ahead of time now to really be all on the same page so that we bring only things we're all pretty synced up on and think are important enough to spend precious meeting time on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Court,
go ahead.
I was just going to ask Court if that helped answer Court's question or concern.
Yeah, it did. And one thing that Sarah and I have discussed, and I know other chairs previously have, is should we lay out time estimates for our meetings to give us all some shared accountability for trying to move things effectively without foreclosing important conversations? That's always the battle.
Mm-hmm. And estimates are always estimates.
Yeah.
Heather.
I'll just jump in on Court's question. I think it touches both on Court's original question about how to, the chairs establishing what's in different meetings, and also on efficiency, kind of taking that establishing what's in meetings down to the next level of each particular meeting. So no longer talking about what are we going to talk about this year, but if it's an issue we're all in agreement on that we're talking about, then it's a question of each meeting. Okay, what specifically do various people want to hear about that issue though, right? And I think one suggestion I would have is that for each meeting, and this is where it touches on efficiency and time estimates and all that, if we have some type of recommendation or draft of something, whatever it is we're talking about, to look at in advance, I think that gives all the various members a chance to in advance say, oh wait, I also would like to hear the answers to XYZ questions, which aren't in this information. And so kind of another way for people in advance to ask for what they want to see in the meeting. And then also, once we get there, I think a way to be more efficient, and maybe it would be easier to give those time estimates, if we have a draft of whatever it may be, it could be anything from, reopening plan type thing to smaller things, but a draft in advance to look at. And then when we get to the meeting, we're all kind of efficiently sharing feedback versus trying to kind of build plans on the fly while we're there. Would that make sense? So this is, again, just kind of personal recommendation for reactions, but that's a thought in terms of efficiency.
I'm sure that you get a packet before your meeting.
We do. That's not to say we don't generally have drafts of things. More that in various ways we generally do, and I think that's an effective way to do things. Absolutely. One of the tools that I often suggest, particularly when I talk with school committees about are their meetings effective, and they say, the staff presentations are way too long. And I say, you know what? The school committee, I think, needs to take some responsibility for that, because you've probably asked for a presentation and not told the presenter what you really want to hear. What are the questions you want addressed? So they're trying to be thorough, and they're putting in everything they can think of to make sure that they cover what you want. But if they knew really the issues that, if they knew really the information you were looking for, it would be a much more succinct and beneficial presentation to the committee. So that, that may be, we have sort of a template of, not that this would be what you would adopt, but, thinking about how do you give direction to your staff about making presentations, like asking, what is the budget implications? Are there policy implications? What is the next step here? So that you're staying, you're getting your updates, and the questions that you're asking or thinking about are the things within your purview to be thinking about, and staying in sort of in that governance and role and out of the operational role. Does that make sense?
It sounds like we should be communicating, the chair we should be communicating with Lori to sort of prime the presenter with what are the actions, or what are the evidence, or what are the impacts that we're hoping to learn about here specifically, and how, because whatever we're asking to see has to somehow correspond to our school committee goals overall, or to our practices and our role.
I see committees where a member will say, well, I'd like a report on thus and so. So it gets added to the agenda, but there's really, what aspect of thus and so did you want reported on? That's going to be, beneficial for everybody to hear about.
And then, in terms of this, with Heather saying about it, that recommendations should be sent out before. I feel that there's that walk to do between shaping things as a committee and presenting just sort of one side, right? Or one path forward. And how do we navigate that to come to the most kind of efficient use of our time, while making sure that everybody has a chance to have their, if I'm hearing Heather correctly, it's that we should sort of prepare everybody with an idea of where we're thinking we're going before we have the meeting, right? Is that
would be, and again, this has been done in, it's all kind of a spectrum, right? And I've seen it done in various ways along that spectrum. I tend to find it more efficient to have some type of a recommendation, I think. Even if, and it can be stated up front, this is a recommendation. Here's a starting point for an idea of how we could deal with X, Y, or Z issue, whatever it may be. And let's discuss. And I don't think that makes it a presentation. At least it wouldn't make me feel like I was not involved in the plan, because I now get to discuss and to say, I like that recommendation, or I don't like that recommendation. I think we should do it a different way. But it gives me a starting point. You know, and others may disagree, I don't know. But I think that's how a lot of our more effective discussions have happened. And we don't always end up going in the direction of the original recommendation, but it kind of kicks off a discussion.
So I'm thinking about different aspects of so there's going to be times when you're getting an update, right? And there's no action that's required. You're getting, it's essentially a presentation that's really for your information.
Right.
May, you know, have impacts down the road for something, but it's not something that at that presentation you're being asked to do anything. That's part of the monitoring function, right? But there's a lot of things I think where you actually, I mean, Lori would never come and present she's getting my tongue twisted here. A budget, when she comes forward with a budget presentation, she's giving you a recommendation of what should be in the budget, right? If she's coming to you with policy, or the policy subcommittee is coming to you, they're coming to you saying, we recommend adoption of this policy, and then you jump off from discussion from there. So I think there are a lot of times when you actually do get the recommendation along with the presentation, and the presentation is really the justification for that recommendation. And then there's other times. So maybe part of this is differentiating between when are we getting a presentation for our information, when are we getting a presentation because there is a decision to be made.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And when is it a presentation? When is it a conversation that needs to happen where a subcommittee conversation isn't quite the same as the full committee conversation? I think they're.
Yeah. So I would say that knowing the purpose of something on the agenda, an action or an action is requested or it's for information only can be helpful too. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. We ready to move on? I'm getting a little mindful of the time here because
Yes, please.
great discussion though. I mean, this is exactly what I was hoping for, that, you know, it wasn't just me lecturing you about roles and responsibilities, but that it was engendering discussion on how you could be effective within that framework. So just, you know, to continue on a little bit more about the chair, being the chair is more really than just presiding over meetings, because there are different, I mean, I think we've pretty much covered all of this. But it takes time to have those conversations. It does take some ability to have some leadership skills and some interpersonal skills to work with the different personalities. And certainly knowing a little bit about Robert's rules and the legal obligations of the committee are important too. So just when you're thinking about this whole big picture, right, of there's the superintendent and there's the school committee and there's this governance role, and how do we find a balance there? There's a gentleman, Tom Alsbury, who's done a fair amount of research on school committee work, school committee superintendent work, who has this sort of this theory of balanced governance. So in the big picture, you could be on the side of uninformed delegation, right? We hired the superintendent. Whatever the old man says is right. We've done our job. Just, you know, we're just here to, for lack of a better way to say it, rubber stamp. You could lean too much in the other direction of, you know, we're going to exit our governance role and we're going to be down in the weeds. We want to make sure everything is happening the way we want it happening. So we're in that realm of micromanagement. So you certainly don't want to be in either of those places. The place, that sweet spot that you want to find is informed oversight. So you have set the expectations for where you want the district to be going. And then you're monitoring that function to make sure that you're in that governance role, you're overseeing that the direction you've set for the district or the decisions that you've made are being carried out appropriately. So that would be that role of informed oversight. And when you're in that sweet spot, then everybody's feeling that sense of working together and things are working well. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So any other questions about what we've talked about before? I have a couple just sort of scenarios to share and discuss, and to sort of maybe parse out a little bit more of the conversation about roles and responsibilities and how different scenarios or situations might be handled. So before I move on to that, any other thoughts that you want to convey? There's not a lot in these scenarios about that effective meeting. So do you feel you've discussed the effective meeting part to, as much as you want, or is there anything else you want to tackle in that area?
I wonder if you could go back one slide very, very briefly. Keep going back to.
Oops,
Nope.
I went back too far. There?
I'll just share with you my experience for the sake of new members. Open meeting law, I could get a lot of help from the required training, from town committee documents and so on. Same with conflict of interest. I don't know how many ways there are to get capable with collective bargaining other than doing it. So I would put that out to more experienced people. I've gotten my experience, quote unquote, on the job. And I wonder how that works elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, and I think in each of those three areas, you also have counsel to lean on.
Mm-hmm, correct.
If any questions come up in those areas that you would want to lean on. I mean, open meeting law, I think that the chair being a little bit of a watchdog for the rest of the committee, and if the chair sees something coming up that looks problematic, reminding the committee, like, remember, do not reply all. This discussion needs to take place in a meeting. No, we can't have an executive session for that reason. That doesn't work. Those types of things, I think you can, you don't need to ask legal counsel every time. And conflict of interest, I mean, there may be blatant things in making sure that if someone does have a conflict, they're not participating in any aspect of the committee's work. If someone has a family member who is an employee, that when that part of the budget comes up, they're not voting on that part of the budget, those things. But, if there are nitty-gritty things that come up, you always have counsel to lean on.
And that's very true in our case. And you noted that we are the employer of record. We know that we have the obligation to sign contracts. How would you define in a technical sense the role of the superintendent and the finance manager in the bargaining equation? That
happens very differently in different places.
Okay.
You've got to rely on the superintendent and the finance director in collective bargaining. Your finance manager is going to be able to tell you the financial implications of decisions that you may be looking at or requests that are being made by the unions. And the superintendent's going to be able to inform you about the implications of non-monetary decisions that may be made, or fill you in on areas where she sees that language in a contract, changes in language would be helpful, or help inform you of, if you're considering a change in language, what are the implications of that change in the day-to-day workings of the district? Want to jump in anywhere, Lori?
I would say that conforms perfectly with what I've witnessed and been part of. I'm sorry, Lori, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no, I think she said it very well.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that's reassuring for all of us to know that your understanding and the way it works here is perfectly aligned and works, I think. Even though it's a challenging part of our responsibility, to be sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, let me whiz through my little guy here. So in thinking about, the roles and responsibilities of each party, you have a couple scenarios just for discussion. because we can tell you, and I think somebody said it earlier, you see the slide and it's right there and it looks easy, and how can you have a problem with it? And then, gosh, then the rubber hits the road and the work starts, and there you go. So here's I would do this differently if we were in person. I would have you up and moving around. Obviously, we're not going to do that tonight. But I just want to throw this out. I'm going to throw out scenario, and some of them are going to come in pieces. And I want you to think about, is this appropriate oversight? Is it overstepping into the role of the superintendent, or is it no big deal? So the first scenario is there's an opening for an elementary teacher in your district. A graduate of your district has recently received their teaching degree and has applied for the position. No reason why that can't happen, right? Someone's applying, anyone can apply for the teaching position that's qualified to do so. So let me move on. We'll add the little twists to it. Many of your constituents have come to you hoping you can help get the former superintendent or the former student hired. Cynthia's shaking her head no there. I'm getting this. So tell me why. So either Alexa or Cynthia, jump in and say, why are you shaking your head? Alexa, we'll give, okay, Cynthia, go ahead.
No, Alexa, go.
Yeah.
That to me gets into purely like that when you had that slide with the two circles, this is purely operational, I would think. This is too in the weeds. I mean, to put it most simply.
Yeah. Well, and who has the authority to do the hiring of teachers?
Principal.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think you would do this applicant a disservice.
That's a good point.
That's
a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
They need to stand on their own. And I think they would, I think that they would think the same. One
would hope.
Yes.
One would hope. You let the superintendent know about the calls and emails that you received, and also encourage the superintendent to hire this individual.
No.
Yeah, I'm going to guess you're feeling the same about that it's inappropriate for the school committee to be trying to use, or any individual member of the school committee, right, to be using their position to try and impact something that's outside of their purview. Okay, we'll try another one. Oops. So school committee member Jane has a school committee Facebook page. On the page, she posts meeting agendas and announcements of school activities. Last week, a teacher was abruptly terminated from the middle school, and people are asking questions. I'm trying to read on two screens here, sorry. Parents are posting questions about the termination on Jane's page. Jane invites people to private message her with their questions. The superintendent is concerned that Jane is conveying confidential information and asks Tom, the chair, to speak with Jane. What should Tom do?
Well, this is why we don't maintain that kind of page.
I must say, though, that if someone did it, Court, they'd be within their First Amendment rights to have that page.
Oh, I know.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're getting into personnel matters here, and I don't, in my knowledge, I don't think that a school committee member divulges that kind of information to the public or get personally involved. So I would say that Tom should say to Jane to not include this story at all in her social media, I think.
How about, I mean, if she didn't include that story, but she's getting questions.
Direct her to the principal of that school or the superintendent?
No, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Tom should be telling, well, for lack of it, advising Jane on the correct way to handle the information that she may have, or advising Jane on how to respond to people who are
concerned. Yes.
People who are concerned.
Yep.
And over the years, I've even seen standard language around this. I can't come up with it exactly, but something to the effect of all personnel matters must be referred to.
I'm going to do one more. I'm conscious of the time. I'm going to do just one more scenario.
Quick one,
Yep.
because I think also school committee members need to be very careful about commenting on posts related to the schools, on other people's posts. I do not myself comment on anything that's remotely related to our local schools on people's, when they get into a back and forth about reopening or whatever, pick your thing. So,
well,
Yeah.
and part of the reason for that is not to be a violation of the open meeting law by having a quorum of the school committee commenting outside of a meeting.
right.
Does that make sense to Alexa and Fatima?
Yeah.
Carlisle, we have a little Carlisle Parents Facebook group, and all school committee members are advised to not comment on anything because we do have more than three, more than quorum are just members. Even if you're not all comment, just the fact that we're all that we just.
So Sarah, what would happen if one of those, or if the members saw something that was just wrong information?
Usually they direct it to the superintendent. That's been, when I've seen wrong information, I bring it to the superintendent.
Yep. So that someone from the district is able to direct people to the appropriate information.
Yeah. And
I thought that's what you were going to say. I thought I let you.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we had this conversation this morning, Sarah.
I think also, just to Cynthia's point about not commenting on school things, we all have to be aware that even though we know that we don't speak for the committee, again, like Dorothy has said, not everybody else knows those roles.
Yeah.
And very often, if you make a comment, 95% of people out there are going to take that as a school committee comment. And so that's just another reason to be really careful about what you say, and sometimes to err on the side of zipping it, just so that whatever you say is not taken as a school committee opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
So
my
Ms.
one last, I know we're moving on, but the personnel stuff is some of the most challenging because there's very little to nothing that I can say either. And we end up just leaving a void, and that just allows for things to fill up, and we generally have to weather that and try to answer what people's questions are about their child, not about the employee. And it's very challenging.
Yeah, exactly. So I was asked to talk a little bit about, the regional districts and sort of that communication flow and coordination and information flow. Because there are certain communications, like we talked a little bit earlier about, but even in a municipal district, there's going to be communication between the school committee and the municipality. Here, there's going to be information that needs to flow well and communication that needs to flow well between the district and the municipalities. And you want to, I think we really kind of parsed this out a little bit earlier, talking about the relationship with the FinCom and the selectmen in the different towns. But there's also that, how does information flow from district to district in a coordinated way? And I think Court and Sarah and I had sort of a brief conversation about, how, and Court and Sarah jump in and let me know if I've got this right, how the sort of pulling Carlisle into the ability to have a coordination and a flow of information so that between the three districts, there's some sense of flow of information. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'll just say from a Concord perspective, I think often we delegate the responsibility of communicating with Carlisle to the Carlisle members, which I don't necessarily think is correct, because then we really don't have the perspective of their town. So I think it's important that we understand more than just leaning on our two Carlisle members to sort of engage more as a regional committee with both towns.
Mhm. So I'm not as familiar with the sort of the setup that you have, where there's like two committees that are the one elementary and the regional committee that have a superintendency union, essentially, right? And then the other elementary committee has their own superintendent, so that some of that information is going to just flow from superintendent to superintendent. Yep. Right, to help keep that coordinated, and I'm sure that it does. But there may be times when you want to think about, do we have a joint meeting where we invite the Carlisle members to have this joint meeting to discuss, that I think that the two areas that would make sense is how much coordination of policy should happen so that there's equivalency moving from Carlisle into Concord Carlisle, or when you're thinking about sort of wanting, hopefully, the Carlisle students and the Concord students to be as ready to enter the high school or the regional district. What might you want to talk about there that would help facilitate that flow? And again, I'm pretty sure I can pretty well guarantee that Lori and the superintendent Carlisle are having these conversations. Yep. But that doesn't mean necessarily that information is flowing to the committees.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that Court and I were trying to get at is also just communication with the communities overall, right? We have a Boston community, we have a Carlisle community, and we have a Concord community. And trying to make sure that everybody feels that they're getting the same information, or to whatever extent. Or that there's same access to the same information. Yeah. And understand how they can participate, how they can engage. Yeah.
And to me, if that's an issue that you've identified and you want to sort of have a goal of improving that flow of information, that sounds to me like maybe an advisory committee that gets pulled together, that pulls in constituencies from those stakeholder groups and talks about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Great.
So, I don't have any brilliant solutions or ideas for you, because my guess is that there's a lot of good information that is flowing, and it's just sort of a tweak to improve, rather than there's a huge problem out here that we need to address.
No, exactly.
Yeah. So just to circle back to the beginning, when Court talked about the manual, I read through it this afternoon. I feel like a lot of what I did tonight was sort of repeating and fleshing out stuff that was in that manual. To me, it looked really comprehensive. I don't know if other people, if you were looking for feedback from me on were there huge gaps in the manual, or I think things were phrased really well. I think a new school committee member coming on would have it as a nice reference about what we want covered in manuals, right? It's not just what we tell people at charting the course, it's how do things work here in Concord, Carlisle, and Concord, that they have a reference to go to and a place to go to.
Well, wouldn't Howard Gardner remind us that we need multiple ways of taking this in and integrating it and making it work? So, yeah, I read the manual twice, and yet I didn't find 1 minute of tonight's session unnecessary or unhelpful. It's been super helpful to me. So, thank you.
I would just note, you could put that MASC does more than policy work, that we also do training and advocacy.
Very good.
Just as a very self-centered, I guess, comment about the manual.
And we do appreciate your advocacy during COVID. So thank you very much.
Yeah, here.
I will make that adjustment.
Okay. So then my final couple slides are, what questions haven't I answered? What else did you want to parse out, discuss, or talk about any next steps from me?
Well, without conferring with my colleagues, I'll step out on a limb. And in reading the manual, I read about the importance of continued assessment of our work. Do you ever do a mid-year revisit to help us facilitate a conversation like that, or are we asking you to overextend yourself?
No, you would not be asking me to overextend myself if that's what you wanted.
Okay.
Not at all. Be happy to.
Well, we'll certainly bear that in mind, because I just one opinion here. I think there's great value in having an objective professional step in and do the facilitation piece on something like that. So thank you. We'll
Yeah.
certainly bear that in mind.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes, hello. This is Eva Mostafi. Sorry,
Hi.
I could listen, but I couldn't join in earlier. So thank you for this, again, very helpful presentation. And every single time I listen to it, this will be the second time, I learned something new. So it's very useful. I had a comment in terms of Facebook, what we have done when people commented and there was wrong information. Sometimes a school committee member would give a link to the school committee meeting, which is a source, and that didn't get anyone in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So that one comment. And then another, I have a question in terms of, we are in the planning stages of goals for the school committee. How would you work those goals into, in terms of thinking how we will be evaluating, setting up those goals and meetings, agendas for the future, that overall plan, as you mentioned, in terms of how do you incorporate the goals for the superintendent that we will be evaluating? So as we are going through the year, we are collecting and we're making note of in our head or somewhere of sort of like the checkpoints or the checklist. I don't know. I'm not sure how to call it.
Yeah.
For those goals on evaluation of the superintendent. So then we're not scrambling, or we're not putting unnecessary pressure on the superintendent to provide us whatever evidence, in a rushed manner at the end of the year.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah. So ideally, that as you're going through the year and you're hearing about your district goals, you're also talking about how, the superintendent is also talking about her work. Sometimes it's just beneficial to simply have the superintendent say during the presentation, this relates to my goal, about, and give you the chance to talk about it, so that once you get to the end of the year, as you say, you're really reviewing information that you have built up during the course of the year, rather than getting what I call like a data dump at the end of the year. So it can be as simple as when you're getting presentations that relate to the superintendent's goal, which is always combined with the work of the district, right? That the superintendent just says, and this relates to my goal on this. And then you're doing that monitoring function all year long, and not when you get to the end of the year and you're putting together that final evaluation, you're really just reviewing knowledge that is built up during the course of the year, rather than hearing it for the first time. I see Lori nodding. So
I think that's a good point, Eva. I mean, I remember the first time you encounter the superintendent evaluation form is a little daunting. You realize the stuff that you need to be paying attention to all year long.
And I'll mention, for the sake of those who haven't had a year or two with Lori yet, that what she tends to do is focus her superintendent's report on her goals. And so really, as she gives us her superintendent's report each meeting, obviously sometimes there are extra things that are updates that come up, but for the most part, her reports kind of report out on her goals, every meeting. And so therefore we have a very natural way to monitor throughout the year. And I found it very helpful, because I just kind of, when I got to the evaluation, I look back quickly at superintendent's reports, and for the most part, don't even need to look back and maybe just look at the last couple, because they build on each other and they summarize where she is on each of these goals. So if you just look at the last couple at the end of the year, that really helps to show where you are. Obviously, our process was a little different last year in the middle of that.
A little bit.
That helps the process overall that she does that.
Yeah.
And a follow-up question: should we focus should we figure out that 4 goals, 5 goals in the beginning of the year that we're going to be evaluating? Because our superintendent is so busy. And if you look at the strategic goals for the district, if you look at her work, she is hard at work and there's progress on all fronts. And it, towards the end of the year when we are deciding what we are going to be evaluating her on, she has been providing a lot of evidence on everything else. So there's an overwhelming amount of information that is great. But for the purpose of evaluation, is there a more coordinated way to think of this ahead of time and set ourselves up so we are a little more better prepared, organized? I don't know if there is a easier way to go through this process. And again, our superintendent, she's so busy. If you look at how many things she's working on, and it's just incredible. So we can't evaluate her on everything.
As I hear you say that, I think back to Dorothy's comment. We steer and the staff does the rowing, but in fact, the superintendent does a considerable amount of both roles. I guess my own answer to your question, Evan, I think it's a very good one, because if we don't know what we're measuring, then we don't know what to pay attention to, and then we scramble. I have found that by repeatedly studying that strategic plan and watching the process whereby Lori will produce the objectives that fit those 4 major themes, it gives me a pretty good lens. I'll use Heather's favorite term there, because I think it's good. A lens with which to do the scrutiny each meeting, each week, each month. But I think you're right. Having that handy as a rubric makes the mid-year and the summative evaluation at the end something that we feel more confident in doing, because it's hard to do an evaluation if you don't feel confident in your assessment. And
so I can't imagine, I hope I'm not sticking my foot in my mouth here. I can't imagine that Lori hasn't said, here are my goals for the year of what I'll be working on.
Well, we're in the middle of it now because we deliberately gave ourselves a pass in August and September on that.
Yeah. So they have the draft, Dorothy.
Yeah. So when you do that final evaluation, there's going to be parts of the job that are parts of the job that Lori's going to be working on that aren't the parts of the job that are, tying back to that district plan and the goals to move the district forward. But at the beginning of the cycle, you should, Lori, I'm sure would define, here are the goals that I would like to work on. Do you approve these goals? And then the limited number of indicators from the standards that you would look at tied to those goals. And that when you're doing that evaluation, you've essentially agreed, this is what we're evaluating you on this year. There's undoubtedly lots of other good things going on. And maybe through some of the standards, you can tie some of your comments into some of those other things that aren't necessarily part of the goals, but you want to be able to focus your evaluation on the goals that have been set. Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
I can do a whole nother workshop on superintendent evaluations.
So
anything else? I'm conscious of the time. We're a little bit over, but not too bad.
Maybe to close this one of our conversations later on this year is going to have to be one that allows us to examine the new DESI rubric and see if we're going to adapt it. We've had those conversations in the past, and I'm sure we'll have them again.
Yeah.
I would highly recommend adapting the new, simpler rubric.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
You're welcome.
Dorothy, thank you so much for your help, and this is a really valuable conversation.
Well,
And if you,
I'm glad that was my intent. So I'm glad we got there.
we will not boast about our good evening, lest you lose yourself to more school committees for more evenings doing this. But this was very, very valuable to us, so thank you.
Okay, well, you're very welcome. And with that, I will say good night.
Good night, and thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Talk to you
Dorothy.
soon. I will send the PowerPoint to Lori in the morning.
Thank you.
Lovely.
All right. Good night.
Thanks, Dorothy. Good night.
Thank you.
All right.
So, Sarah, if I may, I'll ask that both committees turn to the school committee manual. I know we've thanked you before, but we'll continue to, Cynthia, because every time we look at it, we look at how it was a considerable effort on your part.
Happy to do it.
We've seen it through its various drafts to its current state, and if you impressed Dorothy, then I
I
think
know. I didn't get it.
you should be feeling good right now.
I had it in her advertisement, so that's good.
So if I characterized it right, we were thinking that a starting question might be, did that manual serve its purpose to make tonight's presentation really sensible to us? If so, how? If not, how not? And then I think we could drill down further into it in terms of questions that it generated or observations, with the idea that perhaps in 2 weeks we would decide to adopt this for the year as one of our guiding documents. Comments or observations? We'd love to hear from everybody, even if it's something general. Did you have time to look at it? Did you get first impressions?
And it's
I'll
really
start general then, Cora, since you're looking for feedback. One, I think it's very useful, very much so. And I think, like Dorothy said, the fact that it details out how we operate here is really important because our districts are unique in how we operate, as are all. But I think that's really helpful. I would only wonder process-wise, I know everybody's gone through it, I'm sure. And some things in here are very standard and, going to be the same for everyone. And some are very specific to us and how we have operated in the past or think we should operate. I wonder if it's worth kind of not going through the whole thing, but doing a quick skim looking for, okay, here's a point that's unique to us. Is everybody comfortable with that? Here's the next point that's unique to us. And just doing a quick reality check on all of it, or are you just looking for people to point out things that they had questions on?
I think we'd be welcome to both. I find that although the region is distinct in so many ways, the manual didn't have to jump through hoops to distinguish CPS from the region, was
Right.
my take on it.
Right.
Heather, are you suggesting that we bring it up on our screen and go through and identify the points that are unique to us right now? Or, do you have a
That's
list?
one possibility. Yeah, sure. And I could even help skim and flag things, I guess. I didn't know if you had a process in mind. I guess I only say wanting to make sure they were all kind of really engaged and bought in on all of the points that we're discussing here. And again, some of it you don't have to buy in on. It's law or whatever it may be. It's standard. But some of them we want to make sure that everybody is in agreement on these concepts. Or maybe everybody is. Maybe everybody's read it in detail and says, don't do that. That's a waste of time. We agree.
Well, we don't know if it's a waste of time until we do it. Let's take the risk and go through it and use that as the way in which each one of us can pause the document long enough to voice any questions or opinions about particular items. I mean, I've got my little list of items, but I think I could just wait for them to get queued up by that document. It's not a small document, but we can get through it quickly because some of the pages are going to be pretty pro forma stuff.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not saying we go through this in detail because it's a long document and I'm not trying to tee us up for an extra hour by any means. Only a, skimming to find conversations that need to happen.
Let's queue up ways that we distinguish ourselves or are unique, to your point, and queue ourselves up for questions or specific comments.
Yeah.
Who could do screen share on that?
I'll take care of it.
Thank you, Lori. Does that sound acceptable to everybody?
Yeah. Court, do you want me to kind of help verbally skim here, given that I launched us into this, or do you want to?
Forgive me, I'm going to propose that Cynthia do it because she knows it so well.
Perfect.
So I'm just going through, obviously, the beginning, the mission statement, the link to the district plan. Then moving through, I'm going through.
Back up for me. Just a minor point, maybe. Do we get sworn in, those of us who are in Concord, in both towns?
We never have.
No, we get sworn in Concord, and by being a part of the Concord School Committee, you are then also a part of the Concord Carlisle Regional.
And that works similarly for Carlisle. Just wanted to say it out loud. Okay.
I think we're only sworn in by the town in which we were.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a whole nother regional structure that's another night where you actually get elected in both communities and then get sworn in both. That's a really different experience. I'll leave it at that. I've lived that one. This is.
I don't think we need to open that one.
I'm just going to
sort of pro forma. They're not.
Yeah, this is all kind of, standard for everybody. No need to go through it.
Anything on budget?
I don't think none of this is specific. I sort of just put our.
Yep, it all looked good to me.
Well, so this is in relation to oh no, sorry, I'm not there yet. I pulled up my own screen. Forget it.
That's fine.
Nope, I'm like 50 pages ahead. Sorry.
So I do have links to our policies and things like that.
Yep.
But
that self-eval, I already mentioned that when Dorothy was in the room with us. So that I found helpful. This prompted me to go back and read the policy again.
Yep.
Duties of the chairperson, I think we just had a good discussion about that. And I think all of this is still consistent with what we discussed. Operations. So agendas, we just talked about that too. I think that's pretty consistent with what we discussed. Everybody comfortable with that?
Cynthia, back up a couple inches there. So just to be clear, distributed at least 2 business days before the meeting. So that would be, let's do our interpretation, Friday, correct? Would be the and if we can do better, we will. And if it's voluminous, we'll do our best to.
I think this is also a good time to point out, Court, you were looking to make sure that, we represent on agendas what everybody wants to see. I think it's also up to the rest of us as members to let you know if there's something that we want to make sure we hear about at a meeting. So, we shouldn't be waiting for that agenda 2 days in advance and then see it and say, well, sometimes this is going to happen. Well, wait, what about X, Y, or Z? But in general, if there's something that we think should be on an agenda, we should be reaching out to our chairs in advance to say, is this coming up on an agenda soon?
Right.
In regard to
And likewise,
agendas,
if there's a question about why something's on the agenda and you're not sure about
Right. Yep.
what is the relevance or something, it's definitely worth reaching out.
Is there a tradition that the chairs reach out to the members of the school committee before before putting the agenda or finalizing the agenda, like we have in the past couple of months, drafts of agendas and inviting this kind of contribution? I don't know how it was done in the past and what is the plan for this year. Are we going to be doing that consistently for every meeting, inviting ideas for the agenda or not?
I'm glad you asked. We have at best an informal set of practices around that. I'll give you my best answer, and I'm going to be receptive to changes or recommendations. We have a first go at an agenda, and there is time within our posting regulations to make changes. So that agenda is not intended to be something that's denies other members their recommendations. But in addition to that, Fatima, I have worked with chairs who made it a practice to check in with me every single week. And sometimes they would say, I have nothing to say, but I wanted to see if you do. And it would be a 2-minute conversation. And it wasn't for debate or deliberation. It was simply for information. Is there anything you need to know about the upcoming meeting? That's certainly a practice that I could resume as the CPS chair, but I don't want to be demanding of people either. So I'd like to play it down the middle by saying I want to be always available and give you regular polite prompts. We've got a meeting coming up. These look like the agenda items, but not insist or demand that you respond. And I put that out for everybody to hear to just get your response. Does that sound right? Heather, you've had more recent experiences.
Yeah, in the couple different years that I chaired, both I and the other chair got into a habit of kind of establishing that we would try to do an outreach to everyone before every meeting, but we'd usually split it up so that each person isn't having 2 people calling them to see, do you have any questions? So we would typically split it up. And again, during crisis times, sometimes this practice fell apart because we were too busy revving up for every meeting. But in general, we would try to, before each meeting, have one of us at least reach out to each person, even if it's a text to say, hey, do you have any questions? Do you want to chat before the meeting Tuesday? And sometimes that would turn into a phone call, and sometimes they'd say, nope, I'm all good. But I think it was very helpful to do that outreach, because very often we did end up having conversations where we would just clarify the information that people had or were looking at before we got to the meeting. So I found it very helpful. And I found it helpful as a member when other chairs did that for me.
And keeping practicality in mind, among other things, when's the best timing for that?
I usually tried in the day or 2 before, after the agenda comes out.
Okay.
So in that window, I'd usually try, the day before the meeting, or sometimes it was the day of the meeting. And sometimes I didn't get to it. And, I would be glad sometimes if I hadn't got to it, someone would just reach out to me and say, hey, I had a question. And I'd say, great, I meant to reach out to you and I haven't gotten to it yet. Perfect. So I think it can be 2-way. If any of us have a question, we should reach out to you. But it's helpful to have that little outreach before a meeting.
Yeah, we can do it a little bit one way, a little bit. Yeah. And in Carlisle, I tend to reach out to the chair around the time that the agenda is posted and say, is there, anything that should really be on my radar
Right.
that's not, or if maybe following one of our school committee meetings here, one of the regional, I may present information to her that could be relevant to her development of the next of her next agenda.
Right.
So it's definitely good to reach out as soon as you have an issue, because we will start talking about the next meeting about 2 days after the last meeting. And so we're trying to be deliberative and thoughtful in putting together these agendas. Definitely, if there's something that's on your focus, bring it to our attention. And then if we don't hear from anybody, then we'll check in. Well, at least I'm okay. I'm okay with that. Or if there's someone I haven't heard from in that interim time period, then maybe we can talk about that. Divide the group into and just sort of do check-ins.
And I would also ask that individual members speak to you or me about what they want more of, less of, different to be effective. How we can support them. Give us some feedback.
I think my recommendation and I've grown to like this process, and I would say I probably pushed back at first, but if the draft agenda goes out to the whole committee, it seems to solicit changes earlier in the week, because once it's posted, it's a lot of work for my office to get both towns to repost, and then you all need to keep track of what version is up, and it just gets confusing. So I think I'd like to send you the draft after we build it and get feedback in the early part of the week so we can make as many changes as we can before the posting goes up. Because once it's up, it's 3 times the work. I mean, we noticed last week when we met, you didn't all have the most recent version, and Aaron and I are trying to tweak, even make sure that doesn't happen. So the more we do before the posting, the better.
I would support that practice, definitely. Again, for clarity, once the final version is available, it's final, and also gives everyone time to chime in and ask questions and make suggestions. So the more time we have, the better for everyone, and I will support that.
So in terms of the process as it's outlined here, I don't think we want to, it doesn't need to be something written in stone that we have to have a draft out to everybody, but, and I'm not sure, I can't scroll myself, but do we add a line saying efforts will be made to have a draft out to members a few days in advance for feedback before posting, or something like that? Get at it or not?
Yeah, just as a best practice.
It's not something I know. Well, I think Lori would agree. It's not something that we want to 100% commit to, because there are times when things are moving too fast and you just can't get it out earlier. But I think as a, like you said, Fatima, ideal practice, if possible, type thing, we could add it if people want to.
With the 2 weeks in between, you'll be able to get back to that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
That's why I'm a little reluctant to put it in there, because sometimes we call meetings quickly.
Yeah.
I don't think this year is going to be our typical year.
I agree.
So I think really getting the material, getting an agenda draft at least a day or two before the posting, and then getting the materials is much more important to me personally.
Yeah.
So because
let's bear in mind the idea that when we look at this next year to adopt it again, because it's going to be annual, that we could certainly add the language. But for right now, let's make it a best practice by practicing it.
Let's see how it goes. Yeah.
Is that okay, Fatima?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I'll just scroll and you'll tell me where to stop.
Yeah. I'll flag public participation only because it's something that we've talked about in the past multiple years. We debated, when and how to have public comments. We've landed on the beginnings of meetings as the most effective usually mostly so that we're not making people wait through an entire meeting to give a comment. And then at times when there's a topic that is of high interest, the chairs use their discretion to sometimes take comments on things. And so far that has worked pretty well. So just wanted to flag that and make sure everybody's comfortable with that.
Yeah, the only issue is for outlining your anticipated timing. The public comments is the biggest wild card.
It is.
But as long as we all acknowledge that, and
Yep.
you know, and if that one goes way different than anticipated, at least we can sort of benchmark where we are and calculate off of that.
Yes.
Right.
And especially if you're taking comments later on a high interest item, it really puts more weight on the chairs to manage those comments in terms of maybe if it's high interest, you might even default to saying, instead of 3 minutes, we're going to be giving people, 1 minute or 2 minutes to comment. And we ask that you not repeat what someone else has said. You just kind of have to manage it a little more tightly when it's something high interest.
And if you've spoken at another meeting on the same topic,
right,
you can
you
go
don't need to
and
repeat.
maybe if there's time for something. Yes.
Right, exactly.
I think this last one's one worth noting too. It's not a dialogue with the public when they come in. You're there to listen, because this is where you really can have a meeting go off the rails.
Yeah.
Yeah, our chair in Carlisle always reminds people that the school committee meeting is a meeting in public. It is not a meeting with the public.
Right. And we've been very successful to hold forums and set another environment for people if we really want to make it more of a dialogue, but not to have it be part of the meeting.
Right.
Laura, you've read my mind. That's what I had in mind. I was thinking when there is high interest topics, yes, as you have suggested, when you arrive in district, is create a different forum to have those conversations, making sure that everybody's heard, while still, being in line with open meeting law and also not taking too much time from a public meeting. So yes, I was thinking exactly the same thing, and that was a very good practice.
Great. Thank
Great.
you. Open meeting.
Pretty standard. Subcommittees, this is pretty standard. It just defines subcommittees, advisory committees.
One thing that would be helpful, I think, to me in planning the agenda is if you are a liaison or a committee representative or have some kind of report that you're planning to give that might be an important, one provoking conversation or something that maybe to give a heads up on that in anticipation of the meeting.
To the chair.
The chair, yes, so that we can be prepared for conversation.
I agree.
I was on a committee that one time tried to streamline that more because, as you probably saw, you're using time up to have those reports. They actually asked for a little paragraph to go to the chairs with the agenda packet from each liaison. And then it just minimized the time that it took to have those updates. It didn't mean there wasn't some dialogue. It just was more efficient. It's another burden on all of you to, keep up with that, but it helped.
I've been on committees where we do that, not a
Yeah.
school committee, but other boards, and definitely is useful.
So do we remember that and consider it again as a possible in the future?
Let's discuss it in our goals.
Okay, yeah, great.
So these are the protocols.
Protocols and practices we've
They
talked
should
about.
definitely be looked at annually, and
Yeah.
Yeah. Communications.
I really don't think there's any. I tried to pull links to policies when appropriate.
Yeah.
It wasn't 100%, so that could probably be something that next year we might tighten up on.
I think that was pretty straightforward. I mean, in terms of the description of communications, I think that worked. Professional development is standard, and
All of the links.
I don't
So
think we need to go through the appendices.
No.
Yeah.
I have a quick thing on that. There's a section on like the onboarding, all of us.
Mhm.
Let me see where that is. It would have been nice, like, so no one told me to review any of, like, none of that was done for me, for example, not in a mean way, but just as a matter of fact way. So this is the first time I ever saw any of that.
Right.
Any of that?
Really make sure that we do that.
That what?
Sorry, my contact just fell out. New school committee member orientation. These, new members should obtain the following materials. No one told me what those were. I mean, I don't know if there was somewhere I could have read it,
Okay.
but I think that it would be helpful to have, like, not a mentor, but just someone making sure that that's just very clearly conveyed.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
all.
yeah.
So anyway, just
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's something.
it was a little frenzied this year. Let's be real.
Yeah. No, that's true. In fact,
Admittedly, we
I
know
will-
that. Yes.
I'll say right off, that should have been the chair, which was me. So I dropped that one, I guess.
I think
And I,
the chair's phone the first two phone conversations with newly elected members that could be part of the conversation. These are resources for you to look into. This is what you need to get done, and this is how the swearing in happens, and where and when, and things of just like bullet points in the first phone call or something.
and I, I think it's very
Like
helpful.
a like new member packet that anybody gets. That's all cute. And
I think that's a very good point, and that's to some extent that's where we're trying to get with this.
Got it.
And I honestly, until Cynthia put it together, I couldn't have told you what was in that list, because each of those that she listed, I think things that, for me at least, came to me from different places as a natural part of the process.
Totally.
You do the charting the course and they give you this one, and you go to
Right.
the town training and they give you this one. So I think that's a list of the things to be aware of, but they're not necessarily things that you can just ask for all in a pile, because they come to you through different, trainings and experiences.
And then, as I recall, some of them are one time, one and done, and some are recurring.
Right.
Ethics, for example, I think nobody's going to remind me, but it's been 2 years. I think I have to go back
Right.
for the state training.
Right.
So does anyone know when the town's training is? I know in the past it was in September, but because of town meeting and election dates,
Yeah.
but does anyone know when that is happening this year?
It has not been announced, but in the interim, the town's committee handbook, which I hope you have received from the town clerk, is another great document.
Yeah, this onboarding was very odd because all of you came on at different times. Usually it's within a couple of weeks, both Concord and Carlisle turn over and we do it all together. And, it just didn't play out that way at all. Literally very different times you all
Yeah.
made your way on. And then Alexa was in that odd
Limbo.
participate but not vote. And so thank you for your patience, because the chairs do it. I usually do a better job too. So
And I don't know, was the most recent recording I think I found was 2018 of the town training. So I don't know if it didn't happen last fall or didn't get recorded. I can't honestly remember. So
I went to the 2019. I think I went to the 2019. That happened in September.
Cynthia, if I can return to 2 items.
yes.
One, I think that the treatment of executive session minutes are not
Oh, yes.
consistent with what we do.
Yep.
I think what we do is fine, but I think what's captured here is fine also. It refers more to in both cases, they're held back as long as they are still part of an ongoing decision-making process.
And I might have made the change in my copy after the PDF got created.
Okay,
So I'll check on that though.
so we will do this periodically in batches, not a one-time annual. Is that where we're
Yeah.
going?
That would be the preference rather than a big,
And
huge.
what about the attorney's role in that? I wasn't clear on that. There was a reference to the attorney as well, which
So-
has not been our practice.
That is not our practice. Is that correct, Lori?
It hasn't been our practice, but I expect we could probably review the practice one more time and be sure we're set on what we're doing and that we're complying with every piece of what we need to.
Okay.
So what would be our process? Is that something where you would check in with Michelle to look at the wording together and come back to Cynthia and us?
Yes, we've made a lot of progress, but I want to be sure where we land is thorough.
Thank you. Okay. And then one final one for me, and that is that on page 38, Lori, I hope that you and Kristen could look at the section entitled Teaching and Learning. I, in brief, would just say I think it gets short shrift. I don't think people understand it's a bona fide department that has the significant role it does.
So Lori, I just took that text from the landing page for teaching and learning. So it might also be a little, might just sort of beef that up a little bit to talk more about curriculum and I think it still has some things that now are under our student services director under her. I'm not sure. I could be wrong.
Yeah, Kristen kept some and Ruth took some, so we'll flesh that out.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, because I wouldn't want people to underestimate or.
Yes.
I'll try to keep her from writing a 10-page.
Or 300 words. That's all.
Right, okay.
Ask Kristen what she does, and it could take a while to answer.
Or less is more in this case.
She does a lot.
Okay. Anything else?
I have a question, suggestion on page 10 on school committee self-evaluation. And maybe this is a conversation for our goals. So the first paragraph is the school committee will evaluate its progress in improving performance and promoting a positive culture that supports the superintendent, administrators, staff, students, and families. I'm thinking also about past experiences of the school committee that were discussed earlier in the workshop and when there was not consensus. I'm wondering whether we can add a word to this paragraph and supporting each other, supporting school committee members also, and honoring their commitment, their time, their service. And when there is disagreement, how do we work with that? And when we talk about, our goal is consensus, is to be on the same page, to operate as an efficient team. How do we get there? Do we have a culture? What does this positive culture look like? How do we work with dissent, with someone who strongly believes in their ideas when they don't fit the agenda? How do we keep them as a member of the team and feeling part of the consensus? So that, my question really is, what have we learned from last year as a school committee? And how can we grow stronger from experiences such as last year and years past as well, when we didn't have consensus?
Well, that's a big question, but it's an important one. I'll give you my answers. I hope they're not just aspirational. One is we do it by example. Two, consensus means agreeing to agree with the will of the committee, but it doesn't mean that we're dampening diverse opinions. How do we capture that here? I'm not quite sure, but the last thing I'll say is I find that consensus in its ideal means agreeing to agree. Even if I didn't agree with you on a vote, the vote is what I agree with because I agree with the committee's will. To be on the committee is to agree with the committee's will. even though as a matter of record, maybe I was in a minority on a vote. That operationally is how I think we can do what you're describing, Fatima.
And I think that if we are all receptive and we all do hear one another, I think it's a very hard thing to sort of to mold, right? To say what it is, but we will feel it and we will experience it, right? That dissenting opinions or there should be a back and forth. There should be conversations. We should not go into everything saying, okay, I know I have to rubber stamp this or what, right? That is not our kind of consensus, is that everyone feels that I consent to, I have made my opinion heard, and I understand, what the will of the group, and appreciate. I appreciate the other's opinion, and I feel that others have appreciated my opinion. I think, and if we are not functioning well, right, we won't have that. We won't have that if we're not functioning well. But I think it's something that we'll feel if it starts to go in that direction. I think it's better to speak up, bring it to one of the chairs early, if you're feeling that you're not being heard. If anyone feels that that their opinion is really being squashed in some way, then it's much better to not let things fester and to let it go.
I wouldn't want to put the entire onus on the person who believes they're not being heard.
Yes, exactly. If others say, I don't think that person was heard and you didn't, that their time wasn't. Yes, that's a good point.
And also to bring this point back to the manual and the line that we're looking at, I think the question of what have we learned from last year is a good one and a big one, and we can talk about it for a while. But can we capture it by adding something to that list? Fatima, you said something about supporting each other. So where it says supports the superintendent, administrator, staff, students, and families, do we make it students, families, and fellow committee members, so that we're including support of each other in this process?
I think, yeah, that was part of the question. I don't see why not. And I'm wondering if anyone is opposed to adding that word.
No.
I like it. I think that makes sense.
I'm going to insert it after other.
So after
Yes, that's
families,
fine.
I guess.
Yes, it's okay.
After what?
After families, to make it students, families, and fellow committee members.
Sure.
Could we make it even stronger? We don't only promote it, which is advocacy. We present it. We model it.
Model it. Yes, I like that.
Promote and present, or promote and model. That really put words around the fact that we're telling ourselves to walk our talk and make that visible. Yes, no, maybe?
I'm doing it.
I like that. You could even replace promoting with modeling. It kind of captures both. You could say modeling a positive,
Cultivating
a positive culture.
I like the word promote, though. We'll go for everything.
Everything it is.
Okay. Okay, got it. Continue.
I would add one thing. This is just school committee member orientation.
Yeah.
I would add a link to the most recent webinar. Now we have, this time we have this captured with Dorothy, with her slideshow.
This meeting.
Right. Yeah, but she said she's going to circulate a link to the slideshow.
Slides? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. In the past, we wouldn't have had access to it. Well, yes, we would, but I guess
In this case, we can have the slides
Right,
and the meeting.
yeah, that makes sense.
because probably most of what's in the slides is already covered. I mean, really, the slides are already covered in the manual, but to have the conversations behind is helpful.
Mhm.
All righty, got that?
Anything else? So we know that we're going to look at this periodically. So it's not as if we are approving it till the end of time.
No, not at all.
If people have additional thoughts that come to them later today or tomorrow,
Keep it to yourself. No, I'm just kidding.
Forget everything we just said.
yeah, don't bother us. They're going to Cynthia, who would be charged with sharing it with all of us at some point, so that it's evident to us if in the future we don't see what we're looking at tonight.
Yes, absolutely.
And then at our next meeting, we will put this on action items and vote to adopt it.
Sounds good.
Great.
It's going to be the Amazon bestseller.
That's right. Thank you, Cynthia, for your authorship and coordination. Such a huge help.
Yeah, here.
All righty.
All right, so we're going to turn to the action items. The first one is to vote to hear a motion, if there is one, to vote to support the MASC 2020 resolution regarding the MCAS testing for the year 2020-2021. We can pull that up on the screen yet again if we want. This is one that not the resolution committee, but I believe, if I'm correct, it was the board of directors of MASC itself that put this one to districts. And my take on this is that it's saying the gain is little and the cost is high. Thus, this is not a very necessary obligation this year, in the opinion of MASC. Would that be a accurate summation? We've heard no objection from our superintendent in this regard.
No, none at all.
Is there a motion to endorse this resolution?
I'll make a motion to Concord and Concord Carlisle school committees vote to support the MASC 2020 resolution regarding MCAS testing 2020-2021.
And
I'll
is there a
second that for both committees.
Heather, second. Discussion?
I mean, I would just say this is in line with what we've said before, that it doesn't make any sense in this scenario. It's only going to highlight gaps that have been made worse by COVID in various areas, and that we're trying to maximize learning time for our students, and to take time away from it to put them through a standardized test like this that isn't going to give us good information is a waste of their time and ours.
Yeah, not to mention the overhead, the resources required of our administrators. I'm sure that all the schools are, doing their assessments and making plans for interventions, and that's where we should be focused in educating our students. So I heartily endorse the resolution.
Might we have a roll call, please?
Anderson, aye.
Booth, aye for both.
Aye for both.
Mesdat, aye for both.
Mustafi, aye for region.
Rainey, aye for both.
Wilson, I for region.
All right.
And then,
Shall I do this final piece?
yeah, just as a little tail on that one, we had also discussed whether we as a school committee want to write our own letter reiterating this, and just wanted to hear thoughts on do we think this is sufficient, or do we think that
Well, just thinking out loud here, Sarah, the chairs could draft something for the committee to sign that simply is a cover to this.
Mhm.
That says, on the following date, it was voted unanimously to approve, and have the members sign and attach the vote to it and attach the resolution to it. That'd be an easy way to simply say, we affirmed what we affirmed.
I like it,
Sure.
if you don't mind.
Comments? Eva?
I'm in full agreement.
Fatima, Alexa?
I agree as well.
Same.
Heather, you okay with it? I see any
I
complications?
am. All
Okay.
good.
All right. So we will take that on, Sarah, if that sounds okay to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just what we had sort of discussed when Lori first brought it to our attention, so.
Now, that's a letter instead of a vote. That's a formal vote. Acceptable? Is that as strong?
Mhm.
Okay.
I think it's just a chance to sort of claim our, to.
Yeah, and more dissemination.
Mhm.
Yeah, I suggest that go to Representative Gavea's office and Senator Barrett's office.
Yeah. Okay. The last
Can you
action
just, Court, can you just copy the select boards of both towns? And I hope you're sending it to the Journal and the Mosquito.
and we'll coordinate that with Mr. Lucy. And yes, the Journal and the Mosquito. And of course, the state reps.
I'd also suggest Ann Peisch out of Wellesley. She's one of the chairs of the education committee at the State House. I think let's
Yeah,
know about it.
Got it. Okay.
thank you. For the
What
name.
we're hearing from the commissioner right now is that this isn't going to get discussed till after the election. And I think I get that, but time is of the essence, and changes in Washington and all aren't happening till January, if at all. So let's not waste away the fall.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've done the work. Let's get it out the door.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
The last one for tonight is a vote to designate a delegate from this committee or one for both committees, although there could be two hats, I assume, for the MASC conference. Others can help me here. What I read yesterday on their site was that, yes, we know the conference is on November 7. We know that voting occurs on various resolutions at 1 p.m., but we don't have the full agenda. We do know that the morning will be devoted to equity and diversity topics, and everybody is invited and urged to attend. And there's a regular registration that will be underway any moment, and a special registration for the member or members we designate as our representatives. And there's a hard copy form that we fill out and fax in or scan in for that purpose.
You got it.
So, yes, no, maybe. Would somebody be willing to or interested in taking this on? You're going to be our ambassador. I don't know how what's the word, caucus with your fellow members if there's a ambiguous or confusing one that comes up. I think we have to entrust you, which is, I think, fine. Is that the way that goes?
I've never gone even in person, so I think it'll be a little different remotely, obviously, but.
I know in the past court, the representatives reviewed all of the items on the agenda, similar to that resolution, to make sure that they could talk with the committee before they went and represent the will of the committee as a group. So that might be something that needs to happen at one of our next meetings once whoever's going to do this gets a chance to read all the resolutions that are on the floor.
That's what I was hoping you would say. I assumed that was so, but didn't want to state it because we haven't seen it yet. So that would mean that on October 27, we make that an agenda item because we know that meeting will precede the November 7 conference.
Sounds good.
Is it not that list, all those resolutions? It's the ones that they have, where the one we just voted on is the first one, and then there are a few
The
more.
book, right?
Pardon?
We all got a book in the mail.
I have not gotten a book yet in the mail, but on the website, there's
Yes, it's on the website. It's right off the homepage.
there's an exhaustive list of resolutions.
And we shouldn't assume that it's complete because we don't know if they've closed the timing on that, but that can get us started. So
Place to start.
October 27, we'll be able to hear a summary of all of those. And we're all urged to go look ourselves at them as well. Anybody want to take this on?
Okay. I'll be willing to go.
All right, I'm going to go, but I have no great.
Just not the same appeal as down on the Cape, I guess. That's actually a hard sell too, because people have a hard time peeling away. But
Right.
I mean, there's no extra joy in a Saturday Zoom meeting, Lori?
I guess, huh?
All right, so might we hear a motion that Cynthia Rainey be our designee for Concord and for Concord Carlisle for the 2020 MASC conference on November 7.
So moved for both committees.
And is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Alexa. And discussion? Cynthia, you take on a lot. Be careful, but too late now on this one. So
I've never gone, so
It stinks.
good to give it a try.
Yeah, and as I read these resolutions, they're important and timely this year, maybe in a way never before. So somebody needs to go for sure. Yeah. Great.
So it's contingent upon all of us to go look at these. So
Yeah.
that, Cynthia doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting to inform us. We inform ourselves, and then
I'll send you the link. So you
we're
can
ready.
Weren't they on the last agenda as well?
Not all the resolutions.
Not all of them. There's about 10 or 12.
Yeah, they spill right out of the homepage, as I recall.
I'll send it.
So might we have a roll call, please?
Oh, Anderson for both.
And Booth, aye for both.
Aye for both.
Is that I for both?
Mustafi for region.
Rainey, aye for both.
Wilson for region.
Okay. And Sarah, do you want to bring us to a close?
Well, with that, at 7:59, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move for both.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
Second for both.
Okay.
Roll call.
Anderson, I for both.
Booth, aye for both.
Aye for both.
Ms. Judd, I for both.
Mustafi, I for region.
Rainey, aye for both.
Wilson, aye for region.
Great.
Night. And
Thank
thank you.
you, everyone.
Good night. Thank
Night, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful evening.